Have you ever run into someone from your past and felt a wave of memories come rushing back, so strong you could almost feel your younger self standing right there next to you? Maybe it happened in a grocery store, or at a wedding, or just walking down the street. You saw them. The one you once shared late-night phone calls with, dreams with, maybe even a life with. And suddenly, time didn't feel so linear anymore. One glance, one awkward smile, and suddenly your heart was speaking a language your lips had forgotten. This video isn't just about old flames. It's about what happens inside of us, at this stage of life, when the past unexpectedly shows up. It's about the quiet ache we sometimes carry, the thoughts we try not to think, and the love we never quite stopped feeling. Because here's the truth that no one tells us when we're younger. Just because the years have gone by doesn't mean the feelings always go with them. Let's talk about it. You see, when we encounter someone we used to love, especially later in life, it's rarely simple. The outside might be calm, a nod, a "Hi, how are you?" Maybe even a polite chat about the weather or the grandkids. But inside, there's a storm of emotion most people never see. And the most fascinating part? Both people might be feeling the same exact thing, but not saying a word. He smiles like nothing happened, but his hand trembles slightly when he puts it back in his pocket. She asks how you've been, but avoids eye contact just a little too long. You pretend to be fine, she pretends to be over it. And both of you walk away, wondering if that old wound just opened again, or maybe it never really closed. There's something unique about love in our younger years. It's bold, raw, and sometimes reckless. We feel everything so deeply, but we don't always know how to handle it. So we mess up. We walk away too fast. We don't say what we meant. We hold back what we really felt. And then, life just moves on. But what happens when the unfinished finds its way back to you at 65, or 72, or 80? You might find that time has changed your face, but not your heart. The same feelings rise up, only this time they come with wisdom, and maybe a bit of regret. Because now you can see what your younger self couldn't. The missed signals. The fear you mistook for disinterest. The silence that was actually longing. So many relationships never end because the love disappeared. They end because two people were too scared to speak their truth. One of the most common things I hear when talking to people over 60 is this: "I didn't know he still cared." Or, "If I had known how she really felt, maybe I would have stayed." And it breaks my heart every time. Because that's the power of fear. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to play it safe, to protect your pride, to wait for them to make the first move. And in doing so, it can rob you of the connection you long for most. Sometimes when we look back, we realize that what kept us apart wasn't some great betrayal or mistake, but simply misunderstanding. You thought they didn't care. They thought you had moved on. No one wanted to be the one to admit they still loved. And so, the silence between you became the loudest thing in the room. Have you ever sat alone, years after the end of something, and cried, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't happen? The things unsaid, the hugs not given, the apology never made, the question never asked. Do you still think about me? These moments, especially when you're older, feel heavier. Because now you understand how short time really is. You've seen friends pass. You've had mornings where you looked in the mirror and thought, where did the years go? And suddenly that one person from the past doesn't feel so far away anymore. You realize, maybe it wasn't just young love. Maybe it was real love, just mishandled. Maybe the two of you weren't wrong for each other. You just met at the wrong time. Maybe you were both afraid. Maybe you still are. But here's something I want you to hear, and I want you to really take this in. It's never too late to love with courage. Even if the two of you never become a couple again, even if they've moved on, or you have, it's still worth acknowledging the truth in your heart. There is healing in honesty, and there is peace in letting go of what-ifs. I know it's not always easy. Sometimes it's easier to carry the old pain quietly than to open up again. But imagine how different things could be if we all stopped assuming and started asking. What if, instead of wondering if they still think of you, you simply said, "I've thought about you often"? What if, instead of guarding your heart behind layers of casual talk, you just said, "It was good to see you. I still remember the way you laughed"? Sometimes, people just need a door opened, a little light in the hallway, a hint that they're not alone in how they feel. But we miss so many chances by waiting for the other person to go first. I'll tell you something I've learned from years of listening to people reflect on love lost. No one ever regrets being kind. But many regret being silent. They regret not making that call, not writing that letter, not saying, "I'm sorry," not asking, "Do you still feel something?" And so often, when two hearts finally talk, really talk, they find that their silence had been saying the same thing all along. That's the beauty of vulnerability. It feels risky, it feels scary, but it's also the only place where true connection lives. You can't be fully loved if you're only showing part of yourself. Now, if you've recently seen someone from your past, someone who still stirs something in you, it's okay to feel a lot. It doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. It means your heart is still alive, that you still have the capacity to care, that you're human. And that's something to be proud of. Love at this age may look different. It may be quieter. Less about grand gestures and more about presence. Less about fireworks and more about peace. But it is no less real, no less powerful. And sometimes, when you encounter your ex later in life, it's not just a coincidence. It's a reminder, a window into who you were and maybe who you still are. It's not about rekindling something that's gone. It's about recognizing the part of you that loved deeply and honoring that version of yourself. Because love doesn't always end with a wedding. Sometimes it ends with a lesson, a memory, a deep sigh, or a smile from across the room. And maybe that's enough. Sometimes what we fear most isn't rejection. It's vulnerability. Because the truth is, vulnerability can feel like walking into a room without armor, without walls, without anything to protect us. And when you're older, when you've already been hurt, maybe more than once, it's natural to want to play it safe. You think, "I've made it this far. Why open myself up again?" But what if that very instinct, to protect, to guard, to stay quiet, is the reason we've lost out on some of the most beautiful moments we could have had? You see, when we were young, we might have held back because we didn't know any better. But now, holding back often comes from the fear that we do know better. We assume we know how the story ends. We assume the other person has moved on. We assume we'll look foolish for still caring. And so, we stay silent. But silence isn't safety. Silence is distance. And the longer we let it linger, the more it begins to sound like truth. You ever look back at an old relationship and realize you misunderstood each other from the start? One of you thought the other didn't care. The other thought you didn't want to be chased. One thought the other left too soon. The other thought they weren't wanted to stay. It's incredible how often two hearts speak different languages, yet feel the same exact thing. And without clear communication, we start writing stories in our heads. She's with someone else. She must be happier now. He didn't even look at me. I guess I never mattered. But here's the hard part. These stories aren't always true. They're just echoes of fear. They're what we tell ourselves to fill in the silence. I once sat with a woman in her 70s who told me she bumped into her ex-husband at a pharmacy. They hadn't spoken in years. The divorce had been quiet, civil even, but she'd always wondered if he regretted it. They locked eyes. He gave a small wave. She gave a polite nod. And then, they both looked away. She told me, "I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask, did you ever miss me?" But I couldn't. My pride wouldn't let me. Then she paused and added, "But he looked like he wanted to ask the same thing." Moments like that are fleeting, but their impact can last a lifetime. Because when we let fear lead, we lose the chance to find out what's really still there. We miss the opportunity to heal old wounds, not just between two people, but within ourselves. And fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. A shrug instead of a smile, a joke instead of honesty, a take care instead of, I wish things were different. That's how misunderstandings begin. Not with conflict, but with caution. We think we're protecting ourselves by not reaching out. But often, we're just reinforcing the distance that was never meant to be there in the first place. Think about how many people walk around every day carrying untold stories, hidden feelings, regrets they never voice, questions they're too afraid to ask. That's the thing about growing older. You realize time is not endless. You begin to understand that unspoken love can weigh just as heavily as heartbreak. But there's beauty in that awareness too, because it gives you a choice. You can keep waiting for someone else to break the silence, or you can be the one to open the door. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be romantic. It doesn't even have to lead anywhere. But sometimes just saying, "Hey, I was thinking about you," is enough. It's not about rekindling something. It's about releasing what's been trapped inside for too long. And if you've ever cried after seeing someone from your past, if you've ever gone home and sat quietly, wondering if they felt something too, you're not alone. Those moments are real. And they matter. They're reminders that we're still alive, still capable of deep emotion, still open to love, even if it looks different now. And maybe it's not too late to make peace with what once was. One woman shared with me how, after 40 years apart, she wrote a letter to the man she had loved in her 20s. She didn't ask for anything. She just thanked him for the good memories, apologized for the misunderstandings, and wished him well. A few weeks later, she received a reply. He had never stopped thinking about her. And though they both had lived full lives since, that one exchange helped them heal a chapter that had remained open for decades. They didn't get back together. They didn't need to. But they both slept a little easier after that. Sometimes closure isn't about the end of a story. It's about understanding it better. And when you're in your 60s, 70s, or even 80s, what matters most isn't what you lost. It's what you've learned. What you choose to forgive. What you choose to say. And who you choose to become in the time you have left. If love comes back around, or even just the memory of it, don't be afraid to feel. Don't be afraid to remember. Because those quiet moments of emotional release, they're not signs of weakness. They're signs of a heart that still works. And at this age, that's not just beautiful. That's brave. Sometimes, just sitting quietly in your room after seeing someone from your past can feel like standing in the middle of a storm, only everything is silent. The body stays still, but inside, emotions swirl like old letters being pulled from a box you thought you'd sealed for good. You sit there and wonder, did I matter to them as much as they mattered to me? Did they ever replay our last conversation? Did they ever miss me when no one was around? It's a strange thing, how someone can pass through your life like a season and yet stay rooted in your heart for a lifetime. And sometimes all it takes is one unexpected encounter, a voice, a familiar walk, a passing glance, to remind you of just how deep those roots go. At this stage of life, we carry more than just memories. We carry meaning, reflection, experience, but also, sometimes, regret. Not the kind that keeps you stuck in the past, but the kind that lingers when you realize how little we truly understood when we were younger. We didn't always know how to love with patience. We didn't know how to speak with honesty. We didn't know how to stay when things got hard, or leave when they got unhealthy. And often, we didn't know that silence between two people can speak louder than any argument. Now, in our later years, we know better. But sometimes, we wish we had a chance to go back, not to change the outcome, but to love more clearly, more kindly, more courageously. And yet, there's peace in realizing that even if the past didn't go how we hoped, we still have power in how we carry it now. Because no matter your age, no matter how long it's been, love doesn't vanish just because time passed. And it certainly doesn't lose its meaning just because it didn't last forever. There are people we loved who didn't stay, but they helped shape who we became. There are stories we never finished, but they still live in the quiet corners of our minds. And there are feelings we tried to bury, but they rise to the surface again when something deep within us is stirred. That's what happens when you encounter an ex later in life. It's not just about seeing someone you used to know. It's about seeing yourself, who you were, who you are now, and the distance between those two selves. Sometimes, it's bittersweet. You smile because it's good to see them. You ache because you know you'll likely never speak again. And you feel everything all at once: love, sorrow, acceptance, longing. But somewhere in all of that is growth. You've lived. You've learned. You've survived heartbreak, disappointment, maybe even divorce or betrayal. And you're still standing, still feeling, still human. Maybe the most powerful thing you can do now isn't to rekindle old love, but to forgive yourself for the way you loved before you knew how. And maybe forgive them too. Even if they never say sorry, even if they never understood what they meant to you. That's the quiet power of healing. It doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's found in a single exhale, a tear released, a smile sent across a room that says, "I'm okay now. And I hope you are too." Some of the strongest people I've met in their 60s, 70s, and beyond are not the ones who live without pain, but the ones who made peace with it. They no longer chase the past. They no longer fear being alone. They've learned how to sit with their memories, honor them, and still open their hearts to the life ahead. Because even now, especially now, your heart still has room to grow. It still deserves kindness, still deserves joy, still deserves connection. And yes, even still deserves love. Whether you find it again with someone new, or whether it arrives in the form of self-acceptance, the door is never truly closed. You get to decide what love looks like at this stage. You get to rewrite what it means to you. Love at 70 isn't the same as love at 20. But in many ways, it's deeper, quieter, wiser. It's no longer about proving anything. It's about feeling safe, seen, valued. And if you've carried a love quietly for years, if your heart still stirs when you hear their name, know that you are not weak. You are simply alive. Feeling deeply isn't a flaw. It's a gift. Maybe you'll never get closure from them. Maybe the words you long to hear will never come. But you can still offer closure to yourself. You can sit with that memory, hold it gently, and say, "Thank you for what we had. I'm letting it rest now." Or maybe you'll decide to reach out, write that letter, send that message. And maybe you'll discover that they too were waiting for the same moment. Whether love returns, or simply finds its resting place in your heart, you'll know you faced it with grace, with honesty, with the courage to feel. And in the end, that's what matters. So if you've ever walked away from an encounter with someone you once loved, heart pounding, eyes misty, words stuck in your throat, take a deep breath. You're not broken. You're simply remembering, and there is no shame in that. You've loved, you've lost, you've lived, and your story isn't over yet. If this message touched something in your heart, I want to invite you to leave a comment below. Maybe share your experience, or simply let us know. Have you ever encountered someone from your past who still holds space in your heart? We'd love to hear your story. Because stories like yours remind all of us that we're not alone. And if you found comfort in these words, consider liking this video and subscribing to Strong Elderly Life. We're here for you, through every chapter, every reflection, every quiet moment of strength. Here's to living with love, even when it's unspoken. Here's to peace, healing, and hearts that still feel deeply. Here's to you, exactly as you are, right where you are. Because this life, at this age, it's still full of beauty, and so are you.